Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Gavin Lon Digital. I'm Gavin Lon. In the previous tutorial, i.e. part 17 of this course, we created the registration modal dialog. Please watch part 17 of this course before viewing this video. A link to part 17 is available below in the description. So, in this video, we are going to refine the functionality for the registration modal dialog. Before we get started with creating the code for this tutorial, I must draw your attention to a bug fix that I needed to make after the release of part 17 of this course, i.e. the previous part of this course. So, I was testing the code for this tutorial and discovered, to my horror, that I was unable to submit data to the server from the registration dialog. The server was returning a 400 HTTP status code. So, the 400 status code means a bad request response status code and indicates that the server cannot or will not process the request due to something that is perceived to be a client error. For example, malformed request syntax, invalid request message framing, or deceptive request routing. I immediately proceeded to investigate this show-stopping bug. I discovered that in the userregistration.js file, i.e. the file that contains the jQuery and Ajax code for the registration client-side functionality, that I had named a property within the anonymous object that is passed to the server incorrectly. Oh no! So here in the code, in the onRegisterUserClick function, if you followed the code created in part 17, and your property is named __request anti-forgery token, this property must be renamed to __request verification token. Please note that this code has already been corrected in the appropriate GitHub repository. I've detailed this bug in the description of part 17. So the reason why the server rejected the client-side request, i.e. resulting in the 400 HTTP response, is because the relevant action method would not be receiving an appropriate anti-forgery token. The register user action method is expecting a valid anti-forgery token passed in from the client because the relevant action method is decorated with the validate anti-forgery token attribute. This attribute is used to protect our ASP.NET Core application from cross-site request forgery attacks. For more detail on this security-related topic, I've included an appropriate link in the description under the additional information section. Great, so now that we have fixed the bug, our code is working as expected. Great. Just one more small thing I'd like to do before we get started is let's change the button used for submitting the user's input on the registration dialog to be labeled as register. So let's open the _user registration partial view and make the appropriate change. Great, so let's get started with the creation of the code for this tutorial. The code we'll create for this video will be created under 6 sections. Section 1, AcceptUserAgreement checkbox functionality. In this section, we are going to create jQuery code that ensures that the user cannot submit the user's details entered into the registration dialog before the AcceptUserAgreement checkbox is checked. To achieve this, we'll simply ensure that the register button is disabled until the AcceptUserAgreement checkbox is checked. Section 2, server-side code to check if a username already exists. We'll create an action method named usernameExists on the server side in the UserAuthController class that checks to see if a user's entered username already exists in the system. Section 3. Warn the user when the user enters a username that already exists in the system. In this section, we'll implement code that will present the user with a warning message on the registration dialog if the user attempts to enter a username that already exists in the system. The code for this will be triggered on the onBlur event of the username field, i.e. when the username field loses focus. The code itself will entail calling the action method, i.e. the username exists action method that we created in section 2, asynchronously by using jQuery and Ajax. If the username exists, action method returns true, meaning the entered username already exists in the system. A Bootstrap alert will appear to the user on the registration dialog, presenting the user with an appropriate warning message. Section 4. Server-side code to add errors to the ModelState object. In this section, we'll ensure that instead of just presenting the user with the currently hard-coded error message, i.e. registration attempt failed, that we add all errors stored within the identity result object to the ModelState object. One of the effects of this is that if for some reason a username that already exists in the system is submitted to the server side, that an appropriate message in this regard will be added to the ModelState object and therefore presented to the user. So in this case, identity will prevent a user from registering with an email address that already exists in the system, and an appropriate error message will be displayed to the user on the registration dialog. Section 5. Make the Bootstrap alert code reusable. In this section, we'll write code to make the code that we created in Section 3 reusable, i.e. this is related to the code to present the user with an alert on the relevant dialog. We will then be able to reuse the Bootstrap alert functionality throughout our application. Section 6. Tidy up the code. We'll add the script references from the user-login.js file, the user-registration.js file, and the JavaScript file that will contain the Bootstrap alert functionality to a partial view. We'll then write code to render this partial view in the home index view. So these JavaScript references will be encapsulated within a partial view, which is a much cleaner way of referencing these JavaScript files than referencing the JavaScript files individually. For content like this and much more, please consider subscribing, and please ring the bell so that you'll be notified of future content. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to thank me by buying me a coffee, I've included a link to my Buy Me a Coffee webpage below in the description. Section 1. Accept User Agreement Checkbox functionality. Let's open the user-registration.js file. Let's write code to add a click event to the Accept User Agreement checkbox. Right, let's create the function to handle the relevant click event, i.e. the click event that will be fired when the Accept User Agreement checkbox is checked or unchecked. If the Accept User Agreement checkbox is checked, enable the register button. Else disable the register button. Let's write code to initialize the register button to be disabled. We only want the register button to be enabled if the user has checked the Accept User Agreement checkbox. Right, let's test the code. Okay, so we have a little issue here. It's because our Accept User Agreement input field is of course not a button, but a checkbox. So let's change the code here so that input is used here instead of button for the relevant selector. Let's run the code. Great. So the register button is disabled when the register dialog is first displayed. And we can now enable the register button by checking the Accept User Agreement checkbox. Great. Section 2. Server-side code to check if a username already exists. So let's open the UserAuthController controller class. Let's create an action method named UserNameExists. Let's implement code that checks the database for the username passed into this method. So we can write a link query that uses the AnyAsync link extension method for this purpose. So this action method returns true to the calling client code if the passed-in username argument exists in the system, and returns false if the passed-in username argument does not exist in the system. Great. Section 3. Client-side code to present the user with a warning message if the username already exists. So let's go to the user-registration.js file. Let's write jQuery code to handle an onBlur event for the username field. So the field name is actually email, which is appropriate because, as we know, a valid email address must be entered for the user's username during the registration process. So we have established the onBlur event. OnBlur refers to when the relevant field loses focus. So when the username field loses focus, we want the event to be handled in a custom way. So let's create an anonymous function to handle the relevant onBlur event. To achieve this, we can simply pass our anonymous function to the jQuery blur method like this. The code for our anonymous function uses AJAX and makes a GET request to the UserNameExists action method. In the callback function that is assigned to the success property, we can check to see if the username already exists. If it does already exist, i.e. the data passed back to the client from the server contains a Boolean value of true, we must handle this case by outputting a Bootstrap warning message to the user like this. So I've got the relevant Bootstrap alert code copied to my clipboard. So I'm going to paste it into the relevant part of the code. As you can see, the alert code is being assigned to a local variable appropriately named alert.html. So we need to ensure that we can add the HTML stored in the alert.html to an appropriate element in the registration dialog. So let's ensure that we have a div element present in the underscore user registration partial view, i.e. the code for our registration dialog that has an ID attribute set to alert underscore placeholder underscore register. We can then write jQuery code to dynamically add the HTML code stored within the alert HTML variable to the alert underscore placeholder underscore register div element. So if the email address entered into the username field already exists in the system, we want our alert displayed to the user. So let's write code to add the alert at an appropriate position within our registration dialog. Conversely, let's ensure that the warning alert is not displayed to the user if the user enters a unique email address. Let's write code for the error scenario, and for this case, let's simply log the error to the console window. Let's test the code. So now, when we input an email address, that we know exists in the system, let's see what happens. Great! So let's enter a username that is unique in terms of the usernames saved to the system. Great! Section 4. Server-side code to add all error messages to the ModelState object. So instead of presenting the user with this hard-coded error message, in the case where exceptions occur when the createAsync method is called to register the user's information with the system, we should rather loop through the errors collection that is made available on the identity result object and add the relevant exception messages to the ModelState object. These exception messages will then be displayed to the user on the registration dialog. So at the moment, if the registration fails, our hard-coded error message will be displayed to the user, i.e., registration attempt failed. So to ensure that the appropriate error messages thrown by identity are displayed instead of our hard-coded error message, let's create a private method and let's name this method addErrorsToModelState. This method contains one parameter of type identityResult. So an identityResult object is returned from the code that registers the user's information with the system. As you can see here, we are assigning the returned value from the createAsync method call here to a variable named result. This variable is of type identityResult. So within our private method that we have named addErrorsToModelState, we can simply loop through the errors collection and add the exception messages to the ModelState object like this. Then if the result object's succeeded property is deemed as false within our registerUserAction method, we can call our addErrorsToModelState private method so that the relevant exception messages will be added to the ModelState object. So if, for example, a user attempts to register with an email address as the user's username that is already saved to the system, this error will be flagged and added to the ModelState object. An appropriate error message will then automatically be displayed to the user. So let's test the code. If we enter an email address that is already saved to the system and then dismiss the appropriate warning alert, so we ignore the warning alert and proceed to submit the email address that is not unique in the system, identity will not let us register a non-unique username with the system. And through the ModelState object, we can see that identity outputs an error message informing the user that the email address submitted is not unique to the system. Great. So let's enter an email address that we know is unique to the system. Excellent. Section 5. Make the Bootstrap alert reusable. So let's go to the userregistration.js file. So we have this alert functionality here, where we are warning a user that the entered username is not unique. We may want to reuse the alert functionality for other messages within our application. So let's make this functionality reusable. Let's create a new JS file in the appropriate directory, and let's name the file bootstrapalert.js. Let's create a JavaScript function named presentClosableBootstrapAlert. Let's add 4 parameters. A parameter named placeholderElem_ID. This will be the ID of the element to which we will add the alert HTML code. Alert type. This will allow the calling client code to choose whether the alert should be displayed as an informational warning or error message. Alert heading. This text will be the heading that appears to the user in the alert. Alert message. The text passed to this parameter will contain the alerts message. So I'm going to paste this code from our clipboard that contains standard Bootstrap alert functionality and assign it to a variable named alert.html. So let's make the code we have just pasted into the presentClosable Bootstrap alert method reusable by appropriately replacing certain hard-coded parts with the arguments passed into the presentClosable Bootstrap alert method. So the arguments passed into this method have now been integrated with the Bootstrap alert HTML, which is what makes this one method reusable for multiple scenarios. Then we can add the alert HTML to the appropriate element with this line of code that uses jQuery's HTML method. Let's create another method named closeAlert. This includes one parameter which will contain the ID of the element that contains the alert HTML. The code for this method simply replaces the alert HTML with an empty string. So this code dynamically removes the alert. So now we can replace the appropriate code with a call to our reusable presentClosable Bootstrap alert method, like this. We can also write code to remove the alert when appropriate with a call to the reusable closeAlert method. So let's use our presentClosable Bootstrap alert method for the error scenarios Let's create a reference within the home index view to our new JS file. Let's also use our presentClosable Bootstrap alert method appropriately within our userlogin.js file, this time for the scenario when an exception occurs. So let's force an exception to occur by changing the URL to point to an action method that doesn't exist. Section 6. Let's tidy up the code. So to tidy up our code, we are going to encapsulate our JavaScript references within a partial view and then write code to render the partial view containing the relevant JavaScript references within the home index view. So let's create a partial view named _auth scripts partial. Let's include the appropriate JavaScript references within the _auth scripts partial view. Let's go to the home index view and replace the relevant JavaScript references currently within the home index view with a call to render the _auth scripts partial view. And that's it. That is much cleaner. Let's run the code. Great! To summarize, in this video, we appropriately disabled the register button until the user clicks the Accept User Agreement checkbox, whereby the register button is subsequently enabled. This is a confirmation checkbox indicating to the system that the user has read the user agreement and privacy policy before registering with the system. We created an action method on the server side named username exists for the purpose of checking if an email address entered by the user is unique to the system. A user must register with an email address that has not previously been registered with the system. We created code to asynchronously call the username exists action method when the username field loses focus during the registration process. If the entered email address is not unique to the system, an appropriate warning message is presented to the user. When the user subsequently enters a unique email address, the warning message disappears. We created code to output errors thrown by identity during the registration process to the user, so that if, for example, the user enters a non-unique username, dismisses the appropriate alert warning message, and submits a non-unique username to the server side, the error message thrown by identity is displayed to the user. So identity will not let the user register with a non-unique email address. And we have added the error messages thrown by identity to the ModelState object so that the relevant error messages will be displayed to the user. We created code to make the Bootstrap alert functionality reusable, and we're able to use this functionality now contained within one code source from other parts of our code. Lastly, we encapsulated our JavaScript references within a partial view and replaced the relevant JavaScript references with a call to render the relevant partial view from within the home index view. For content like this and much more, please consider subscribing, and please ring the bell so that you'll be notified of future content. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to thank me by buying me a coffee, I've included a link to my Buy Me a Coffee webpage below in the description. It will be greatly appreciated. A special thank you to those who have bought me coffees. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much. I really enjoy reading your comments, so please feel free to engage with me in the comments section. The latest code can be found on GitHub. I've included a link to the relevant repository below in the description. Thank you and take care.